Thank you. And I just found, first, I found this survey a little bit misleading. I thought we keep comparing ourselves to San Francisco and Oakland. And we also talked on one memo, we were talking about $5 per 1,000, and now we're talking 0.75, and there's a lot of misleading numbers, but I went through it and I got through it. It basically comes out to a 220% increase to the current tax situation that we have. And I don't know why we keep comparing ourselves to San Francisco and Oakland. They're not exactly working models of having low-income housing and and a system that's working, quite frankly. I wish we'd compare ourselves to the places like that have housing and have affordable housing, but we don't. We keep doing the same things and expecting different results. This is going to be another new tax, and it's not the most egregious tax, and I get that it's going to affect properties of $2 million and above, and I'm not saying that this isn't positioned in a way that won't win the hearts and minds of people who are interested in I guess, as some people put it, punishing the rich and giving to the poor, but that's not what this thing actually does. It increases the transfer taxes, yes, but people who are transferring property to a developer, for example, the developer will have to pay a higher fee for that property, and then, of course, the development fee will have to go pass along to the actual development, and therefore increasing the price of development, which is something that I was hoping that we could start going the other direction and decreasing that price of development. One more thing, I've been in City Council for 7 years, and I don't often disagree with Councilmember Dieppe, but I've never lived through an area where we're actually looking for 20 million or any million in budget deficits. We were projecting some budget deficits, and I don't know if Jennifer could you clarify that? Have we had a budget deficit in any one of these years? I don't remember cutting anything in the last 7 years. We had budget surpluses, to my recollection.
We did have some budget deficits in the last 7 years, for sure.
Yeah, Councilmember Jim Shannon, Budget Director, we had some deficits that we were able to solve through the proposed budget process by identifying efficiencies or small increases of revenue to solve those deficits.
Haven't we been above projections most of the time? I know that we were a couple of years we were not above projections, but we've been above projections on revenues coming in.
There have certainly been, in particular, the last forecast process. We had new information that came in after the release of the February forecast, and so we came into the proposed budget with a small surplus. But in general, or rather, there have been still some small surpluses or some small deficits. We haven't had, you're correct, in the last 7 years, we haven't had to take any major reductions in services, yes, but we have had to find ways to close small deficits in the general fund.
Understood. Yeah, nothing that you guys couldn't handle, and I didn't see any huge issues. I actually always say that I'm leading a charmed life. I've never had to make huge budget cuts like other council members, like former council member and now Mayor Liccardo has had to go through some of these budget horrors where they actually did have to cut jobs and things, and I haven't had that in 7 years. One other thing that I don't like the discussion is this is a general tax, and we're already saying, even in the language that we're using, we're trying to imply that this will all go to housing. Even on the language it said, even though we changed one of the words to can, but it makes it sound like we're going to spend all this money on housing, the veterans and homeless people and all this other stuff. But this is a general tax and and most likely will be in the future, at least, could be spent on anything. Am I incorrect? Could it be spent on anything? Any staff want to answer that?
Yes, good.
Okay. Could it be spent on pensions?
Yes, it could.
Could it be spent on, and I know the county has this beautiful valet program that they spent $4.6 million a year. Could it be spent on valet parking?
Yes, it could, if the council approved a program and appropriation to do that.
Yes. Could it be spent
Just to
on?
clarify, we don't actually have valet parking.
I didn't say we did.
Okay. Just want everybody to be clear.
Yeah, I know we don't, Mayor.
We
but
do walk like everyone else.
Yes, and we do a great part in giving our employees Clipper cards. But the county did pass that, and it's in service. And if anybody wants to go down and see it working, you could see it working. We cannot control what other council members decide to spend this money on, and that's my real point here. We could spend it on statues, as the county has as well. We could spend it on many other things, including housing, yes, but we could choose in any one year to spend it on anything. And quite frankly, this last Measure B, for example, it was a general fund from the city of San Jose and has this committee that's been formed to measure things. But since it's a general tax, these people are coming back with deep frustration as to how the money is really being spent, because all we really have to do is prove that we spent $1 on some of these things, and because everything is fungible. And I want to talk about a little bit about transfer taxes. I think that transfer taxes, although, like I said, it's not the worst things that can happen, it could worsen the crisis that we're in. I did lead up and talked about transfer of property. Usually the big dollar amount property are not homeowners. I'm not expecting to, if I sell my home, I'm not expecting to pay any of this, which is great. But the people who are developing properties are the ones who are going to end up paying these fees, because they're paying $2 million for a piece of property. They're paying $4 million for a piece of property to develop into housing. And that's who it's going to hit. And eventually, those costs will be passed along to the cost of developing. And it could actually exacerbate the very problem we're trying to solve. And in my memo, I also talked about the need, that we already have money coming in. We have taxes. We've already passed several taxes in the city of San Jose. We've passed 2 general taxes, Measure B and Measure G. We've passed a dedicated tax, and we've failed on passing Measure V, but this will be the 5th tax that we're proposing in the last 4 years. And we haven't even begun to spend down the $1 billion that was passed back in 2016 from Measure A. $1 billion is projected to come in from Google, $1 billion from Facebook, $2.5 billion from Apple. All these companies are actually voluntarily giving money to solve our housing problems, and I think it's really important that we actually look at ways to spend that money before we go ask for more. And I really want to highlight the fact that it takes more than money to build housing. It actually takes people to want these housings next to them, right? It takes land, and we need to identify land, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have. And the cost of construction. 2 weeks ago, we had a presentation, and we saw that the cost of construction was one of the biggest problems that we have. And this ballot measure would not solve those issues. I know that even if this the polling itself talked a lot about housing and mental health services. These services are done by the county, and I don't think that we should be actually using this money if it ever comes to fruition. I don't think we should be using this money to start a whole mental health department or something, because we're not in that industry. I'm hoping that we're not actually going to be subsidizing what the county should already be responsible for. That's another thing that bothered me about the polling that was done. And in the end, I know that it is easier to pass a general tax than a dedicated tax. But if we truly want this money to go to housing, it should be a dedicated tax. And I'm willing to support it if somebody wants to change this. If the maker of the motion is willing to make this a dedicated tax, I'm willing to support this measure, because that's the only way to truly guarantee that the money will go to what we want it to go to.
Is that a request for a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilmember Khamis, thank you for your comments. I'm going to decline the friendly amendment. I think, to your point, I hear you. I would disagree that and simply say that there's nothing fiscally responsible about not having the discretion to spend money. To the point about the budget, every year since I've been here, the 3 years, we've been short, except for last year when we had a windfall and we kind of got out of it. But we balance our budget every year. It's a $3 billion budget, and we balance it every year where we set aside the money that we know we're going to be short for the following year. So we as a council collectively pass the $3 billion budget, but each one of us have the discretion to spend about $100,000 per the mayor's discretion in our own districts. So we pay for facilities, we pay for parks, we pay for everything, these budgets, and we look at the line items, and more or less, it's all important stuff. Like I've said before, there's not a lot of blood to squeeze from the stone of our budget. And last year we had $400,000 to spend, but that's the point. Like we as council members don't get a lot to play with to serve our constituents for projects, Alviso Park or the substation in South San Jose. We don't get a lot of discretion to spend, and so I'm saying that fiscal responsibility, true fiscal responsibility, is when you are measured, when you have excess amounts of money to spend, and you choose to spend it responsibly. In the state of fiscal affairs in San Jose right now, we don't have a lot of leeway to act responsibly. We have to keep the ships running, the boats afloat, and things going day to day. So it's rare to find a revenue source that the public will support, and I think that given the state of affairs in the city, I have to support the motion as is so we can proceed forward.
But we do have, and it's okay, you don't have to take but I just spouted off at least several new monies coming in, including from Measure B, Measure H, Measure T, Measure A from the county, $1 billion from Google, $1 billion from Facebook, $2.5 billion from Apple. The county gets an additional $50 million annually. eBay said that they're going to increase anywhere between $5 million to $35 million a year for us in their revenues. We have more money coming in for our marijuana tax. Yes, I would like to have more spending and more money to spend in areas, especially housing. But why don't we just look at what we have now instead?
Well, let's not confuse the point. Let's not confuse the public. All the things that you were saying, Measure B goes to public safety or goes to roads. Measure T goes to infrastructure and also public safety. Measure A is the county measure that the Board of Supervisors will allot some money to the city, or maybe not. We don't really have a say. And last year we tried Measure V to get specific money for housing in San Jose, and voters did not pass that. So we don't have a source, an ongoing revenue fund for that. As I understand it, before my time, we had the redevelopment agency that allotted $40 million a year to the city for affordable housing, and that dissolved in 2011 under Jerry Brown. And so we've been trying to plug that hole and doing what we can. And our affordable housing development in the city has gone down because of lack of funding, and we try to put it on the backs of developers by inclusionary housing and by impact fees, and it becomes a trickle. It's not enough. The city has to do more, and this is an attempt to get the resources to plug that $40 million to do more.
Councilmember Diep, first and foremost, Measure B doesn't pave highways anymore. It did in the first year. It is a general fund. It doesn't do it anymore. All the other taxes do.
I think he was referring to Measure B in 2018. But
yes.
That
was a designated tax, and I supported it.
Well, that's the point. When we designate all these taxes, we don't have the discretion.
You already said no, that you're not willing to support the amendment. I mean, are you going to reconsider?
Councilmember, I think he indicated he wasn't going to accept the friendly amendment.
Well, basically, I would like to do a substitute motion to pass my memo, which basically says we shouldn't pass a tax.
Okay. Motion from Councilmember Khamis. Is there a second? Okay, a second from Councilmember Jimenez.